He was America's greatest outlaw. But when Johnny Cash recorded his final song in August 2003, he left behind a confession that shocked even his closest friends. Weak, heartbroken, and alone, Cash poured his darkest secrets into Like the 309. From the real story behind Ring of Fire to the night he tried to kill himself in a cave. Even his own children didn't know the whole truth. Until now. After 20 years of silence, we're finally revealing what Johnny Cash's last words really meant. Johnny Cash was born on February 26, 1932, in a small town called Kingsland, Arkansas. His parents, Ray and Carrie Cash, were poor farmers trying to survive during the Great Depression. They had 7 children, and life was hard. In 1935, when Johnny was just 3 years old, his father took a chance on a government program that promised a fresh start. The family moved to Dyess, Arkansas, to join a farming community built by the New Deal. There, they were given a small house, a barn, and land to grow cotton. In return, they had to clear the land and farm it. If they succeeded, they could eventually own it. The family worked hard in the fields. Their house was simple, with 5 small rooms and a dirt road out front. The land was rough and full of swamps, but they didn't give up. This tough beginning shaped Johnny's ideas about work, faith, and struggle, things that would later show up in his music. When Johnny was 12 years old, something happened that changed him forever. His older brother, Jack, was working at the school's shop, cutting wood with a large saw. That morning, Johnny begged Jack to go fishing with him instead, but Jack chose to work. As Johnny walked home from the river later that day, his father pulled up in a car and gave him terrible news. Jack had been badly hurt in an accident. The saw had cut him deeply, and though he lived for 8 days, he didn't survive. Johnny always felt that something strange happened that day. Years later, he said he believed it might not have been an accident. The loss of his brother crushed him, but it also pushed him toward faith. Just a week after Jack died, Johnny went to church and gave his life to Christ. Even before that tragedy, life on the farm was hard. By the time Johnny was 8, he was already dragging a heavy cotton sack through the fields, picking hundreds of pounds of cotton each day. The work was exhausting, but music made it bearable. After long days in the fields, the family would sit on their porch and sing. His mother played guitar, and they sang old hymns and folk songs together. Johnny loved the gospel music he heard at church and on his uncle's old radio. He especially loved the songs in his mother's hymn book, which brought him comfort when he was scared or sad. That same year, Jack died. Johnny sang in public for the first time. He and his mother performed The Unclouded Day at their church, with her playing the piano. It was a small moment, but one that stayed with him forever. Carrie Cash, Johnny's mother, believed in her son. Even when they had almost nothing, she found a way to pay for him to take singing lessons. But after just 3 lessons, the teacher told Johnny to stop. His voice was special, and she didn't want him to change it. Carrie always told him he was meant for something greater. She believed he would sing for the world one day. In July 1950, a 19-year-old named J.R. Cash joined the U.S. Air Force during the Korean War. He went through training in San Antonio, Texas, and was later sent to West Germany, where he worked in a small radio shack, listening in on Soviet messages. He got so good at Morse code that, according to his daughter Roseanne, he was the first American to hear that Joseph Stalin had died in 1953. But even with his skills, Cash felt lonely. He was allowed just 1 phone call home each year. So, to fill the silence, he bought a cheap guitar for $5 from a shop in town. With it, he started a band called the Landsberg Barbarians and played music for other soldiers at the base. During those years in Germany, he started developing his unique sound, a deep voice, a steady rhythm, and songs that felt real. One day, in 1953, he went to see a movie at the base theater. It was a prison documentary called Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison. The film hit him hard. Afterward, he wrote to his fiancée, Vivian Liberto, saying, "They are like me. We are all prisoners here." That feeling stayed with him. He began writing a song about an inmate dreaming of freedom, picturing a train headed for San Antonio. That song became Folsom Prison Blues, complete with the haunting line, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die." He hadn't even started his music career yet, but the song would later define a big part of his legacy. Cash was discharged in July 1954 and quickly returned to the U.S. 1 month later, he married Vivian in San Antonio. They moved to Memphis, where he sold vacuum cleaners to make ends meet. But his dream was still music. At a car dealership, he met two mechanics, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant. Neither of them was really a musician, but Cash talked them into forming a band. They practiced in kitchens and garages until they created a rough, driving sound that matched Cash's voice perfectly. They called themselves the Tennessee Two. Cash was inspired by Elvis Presley, who had just made a splash with Sun Records. He kept trying to get a meeting with Sun's owner, Sam Phillips. When he finally did, Cash sang gospel songs, but Phillips wasn't interested. He told Cash to come back with something people would actually buy. Cash didn't give up. He came back with a new song, "Hey Porter," about coming home from overseas. Phillips liked it. On March 22, 1955, Cash recorded the track with the Tennessee Two. A few months later, it was released alongside "Cry, Cry, Cry." The single got radio play, and just like that, Johnny Cash had a career. In May 1956, Johnny Cash released a song called "I Walk the Line." He had written it years earlier while serving in the Air Force in Germany, as a promise to stay faithful to his wife, Vivian Liberto. The song took off like wildfire. It hit #1 on the country charts and stayed there for 6 weeks, staying on the charts for nearly a year. It even crossed over into the pop charts, reaching number 17. Over 2 million copies were sold in the U.S. And suddenly, Johnny Cash was a star. The song's rhythm, what would later be called the boom-chicka-boom sound, became part of his signature. But there was something strange about it, too. While the lyrics were all about loyalty and staying true, Johnny's real life didn't match up. That tension between the man and his music would follow him for the rest of his life. Just 2 months after the song's release, Johnny made his first appearance on the Grand Ole Opry stage. Dressed in black and backed by his band, the Tennessee Two, he played 3 songs to a warm crowd. But even before he got on that stage, things weren't easy. The manager made him wait 2 hours just to talk, asking him, "What makes you think you belong here?" Johnny didn't flinch. He said he had a top 10 hit and believed the audience would want to hear him. He was right. That same night, something else happened, something that would change his life. Backstage, he met June Carter. She was getting ready to perform, quickly tuning her guitar. June was still married to another singer, Carl Smith, and Johnny was married to Vivian. Nothing happened that night, but the spark was there. It would take years and a lot of pain before they could be together. But that meeting was the start of one of the most famous love stories in country music. As Johnny's fame grew, so did the pressure. By 1957, he was on the road constantly, playing more than 200 shows a year. The travel, the long nights, and the need to stay energized pushed him toward a dangerous choice. On a road trip to Florida, he took amphetamines for the first time. They helped him stay awake, and they were easy to get. Just a few dollars for a bottle of pills. At first, it seemed like a smart fix, but soon, it turned into something much worse. Johnny wasn't alone. Many musicians at the time were doing the same thing. Even his roommate, Waylon Jennings, was using. People around him noticed how jumpy and strange he became, but they mostly laughed it off. Despite his growing addiction, Johnny kept making great music. His songwriting and performances stayed sharp, even as his personal life started to crack. That mix of creative power and private chaos would become a big part of who he was. In 1957, after a TV show in California, Johnny met a producer named Don Law at a party. Don worked for Columbia Records and convinced Johnny to switch labels once his Sun Records contract ended. The deal was a big step up. In 1958, at just 26, Johnny packed up his family, Vivian and their 3 young daughters, and moved to California. At first, they lived in a small apartment in North Hollywood. Later, they bought a house from TV host Johnny Carson in Encino. Johnny set up his business in Hollywood and started building a new kind of career. He liked the freedom that California gave him, far away from the rules of Nashville or the tight scene in Memphis. In April 1963, Johnny Cash released Ring of Fire, a song that quickly climbed the charts and became one of his biggest hits. But behind the success was a storm brewing at home. Officially, the song was credited to June Carter and Merle Kilgore. Years later, Cash's first wife, Vivian, shared a very different story. She claimed Johnny told her he had written the song while fishing, then decided to give June half the credit. When Vivian asked why, he said she needs the money. She also claimed the song was actually about something far more personal, written during a wild night of pills and booze. Whatever the truth, the song's signature horn section, something Johnny said came to him in a dream, became part of his sound for years. In 1964, he released Bitter Tears, a concept album about Native American struggles. Radio stations didn't want anything to do with it. Columbia Records barely promoted it. Cash was furious. He bought thousands of copies with his own money and sent them to stations himself. He even published an open letter in Billboard magazine asking radio managers, "Where are your guts?" His gamble paid off. One of the songs, The Ballad of Ira Hayes, eventually became a hit. At the time, Johnny often claimed he had Cherokee and Choctaw roots. People believed him, he looked the part, and even some native communities accepted him. He wore a black obsidian stone around his neck for protection and performed on reservations. But years later, when DNA testing became more common, it turned out his ancestry was mostly Scottish and English. Even so, he never backed down from supporting Native American rights. He once said, "If any group of people face injustice and are denied their rights, then there is no freedom or justice for any of us." In 1965, things got worse. Cash was arrested at the airport in El Paso for smuggling pills from Mexico. Customs agents thought it was heroin at first, but they found hundreds of amphetamines and tranquilizers hidden in his guitar case. That night in jail, Cash hit rock bottom. "I just want to stay here and die," he told a guard. Vivian flew out to be with him, and thanks to some help from country music legends like Gene Autry, the judge gave him a fine and a suspended sentence. But the downward spiral didn't stop. He missed entire tours, got banned from the Grand Ole Opry after smashing lights on stage, and lost his voice to laryngitis caused by drugs. By 1966, he weighed barely 150 pounds and couldn't sleep or eat. His performances became unreliable, his marriage had ended, and he was caught in a haze of addiction and self-destruction. Then came 1967. Cash nearly died after being found in a small town in Georgia, unconscious and alone. He later tried to disappear by driving into the Tennessee wilderness, hoping to lose himself in a cave and never return. Around that same time, his forest fire lawsuit finally caught up with him. The blaze he'd caused 2 years earlier had destroyed 508 acres and almost wiped out a species. When officials questioned him, he just shrugged and said, "I didn't do it. My truck did." The case was settled for $82,000. By the end of 1967, Cash had become a shell of the man he once was. He looked like walking death, as he put it, and he knew something had to change, or he wouldn't make it. On February 22, 1968, in London, Ontario, Johnny Cash did something unforgettable. During a concert in front of 7,000 fans, he and June Carter had just finished singing their hit song, Jackson. Then, out of nowhere, Cash stopped the show. With June's mother, sisters, and the Statler brothers watching from the stage, he turned to June and proposed. She tried to avoid giving an answer, but Johnny wouldn't let it go. "I'm not going to sing until you answer me," he said. "Will you marry me?" The crowd went wild when June finally said yes. Just 8 days later, on March 1st, 1968, one day after they won a Grammy for Jackson, they got married. The ceremony was quick, less than 5 minutes, in Franklin, Kentucky. They chose that town because they could get a license and marry on the same day. At first, they planned to wait until June, but Johnny's kids were so excited, they talked them into doing it sooner. From the outside, it looked like a perfect love story. But behind the scenes, things were much more complicated. While fans believed Johnny and June were soulmates, their private life told a different story. June dealt with a lot of pain in their marriage. According to biographer Robert Hilburn, Johnny cheated on her more than once. even while she was pregnant with their son, John Carter Cash. The worst betrayal came when Johnny had an affair with June's own sister, Anita. Reports say this led to a pregnancy that ended in abortion, and it wasn't just one time. He was involved with Anita on 2 different occasions. These betrayals were devastating for June. Her son later shared that her deep fear of Johnny cheating again led to paranoia and drug use. He grew up knowing the family could fall apart at any time, but somehow, June forgave them both. When Anita got older and needed help, June even moved her into their home. It was a powerful example of how much June was willing to endure and forgive. In the summer of 1969, Johnny Cash stepped onto America's television screens. With a deep voice and calm confidence, he began each episode of his new show by saying, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." The show aired on ABC and was filmed at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. It didn't take long to become a hit. By 1970, it was one of the top-rated shows in the country. But this wasn't just any music show. Cash brought together artists from many different backgrounds. People like Bob Dylan, Ray Charles, Joni Mitchell, and Louis Armstrong. It was rare to see that kind of mix on TV at the time. He didn't care what the network thought. He let Chris Christopherson sing about being stoned. And he invited Pete Seeger, who was known for protesting the Vietnam War. He also used the show to introduce older country legends like Bill Monroe and Merle Haggard to a wider audience. The show ended in 1971, but it made it clear Johnny Cash wasn't just a country star. He was a voice that reached across lines. Even though he was famous for singing in prisons and acting like an outlaw, Cash didn't spend much time behind bars himself. The longest he stayed in jail was just one night in 1965. He had crossed the border from Mexico with hundreds of amphetamine pills and got caught. That short time in a cell changed him. Instead of hiding it, he turned it into a mission. Over the years, Cash performed in many prisons, not just Folsom and San Quentin. He gave money to support prison reform and even let a former prisoner live in his home. He spoke with President Nixon about changing the system. He believed that prisoners deserved respect and a second chance. His 1974 concert in a Swedish prison led to another live album and reminded people how deeply he connected with those behind bars. But while he fought for others, he was also fighting his own demons. Starting in the late 1960s, Cash's drug addiction was getting worse. Even though his career was rising again with songs like Folsom Prison Blues, he was often too out of it to record in a studio. That's partly why the prison concerts became so important. They were sometimes the only way he could perform. When he married June Carter in 1968, many hoped she could help steady him. His Christian faith also played a role. One story from his autobiography tells of a sheriff who gave him back a bag of pills and said, "You can throw these away and live, or take them and die." That moment helped him choose a different path. But his recovery was never simple. He would get clean for a while, then fall back into addiction. He once described it as a Jekyll and Hyde situation. He could be kind and clear one day, and a different person the next. His bandmates saw the difference too. Some nights, he was sharp and professional. Other times, he could barely get through a show. Years of drug use took a toll on his body. He had ulcers so bad that doctors had to remove parts of his stomach. By 1975, he was ready to tell his story, or at least part of it. His book, Man in Black, focused on the good parts: his childhood in Arkansas, his love for June, his Christian faith, and his recovery from drugs. It became a bestseller. But there were things he didn't include. He left out the darkest moment of his life, a time in the late 60s when he went into a cave planning to die, only to have a spiritual experience that made him want to live. He didn't talk about his father's abuse or his own cheating. Those truths only came out decades later, in a second autobiography. Back in 1975, he wanted the world to see him as someone who had fallen, but found redemption. And for a while, that's exactly what people saw. By the mid-1980s, Johnny Cash's solo career was struggling, but something special happened in 1984. During a Christmas TV special he was filming in Switzerland. That night, Cash sat around with 3 old friends, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson. They played music, talked, and laughed. There was no plan, no business deal, just four men who loved music and each other's company. Out of that friendship came a group that would soon be known as the Highwaymen. At first, they didn't even call themselves that. Their early albums were just credited with their names. But their sound, a mix of grit and honesty, connected with fans. In 1985, they released their first album. The song Highwayman shot to #1, giving Cash his first big hit in years. Another single, Desperados, Waiting for a Train, also did well. People were drawn to their mix of rough voices and deep stories. As Willie Nelson said, their voices didn't seem like they'd blend, but somehow they did. The Highwaymen gave Cash a lifeline. While his solo albums weren't doing well, this group gave him a new sense of purpose. They released 2 more albums and toured together into the late 1990s. During those years, Cash stayed in the spotlight, even as the music world started to turn toward younger, pop-leaning country artists. But behind the scenes, things weren't easy. On July 15, 1986, Cash found out Columbia Records had dropped him by reading about it in the newspaper. After nearly 30 years with the label, he was let go without a phone call. Columbia said it was just business. Cash hadn't had a hit in years, and another label had offered him more money. But the news hit hard. He signed with Mercury Records next and released 4 albums between 1987 and 1991. None of them made a splash. This was a low point for him, personally and professionally. At the same time, his health was declining. In 1983, he'd been kicked by an ostrich on his farm, leading to an injury that brought him back to painkillers. By 1988, he had to undergo heart surgery. His body was failing him, and the music industry seemed to be moving on. Still, Cash kept performing, especially with the Highwaymen. But it was getting harder. He and Waylon were both dealing with serious health issues, and the long tours took a toll. Many in Nashville saw him as part of the past, not the future. Then, something unexpected happened. In late 1992, after a performance at Bob Dylan's 30th anniversary concert, Cash was approached by Rick Rubin. Rubin was a music producer known for working with rap and heavy metal artists, not country legends. But he saw something in Cash. He told him, "I want you to do whatever feels right for you." Cash agreed. They recorded at Rubin's house. Just Cash, his guitar, and his voice. No effects, no fancy studio tricks. The result was the 1994 album American Recordings. It was raw and honest. It won a Grammy and introduced Cash to a whole new generation of fans, many of them more into punk and metal than country. The album reminded the world who Johnny Cash really was: a storyteller, a fighter, and an outsider. Over the next several years, Cash continued recording with Rubin. In 2002, he released American 4, The Man Comes Around. The album included a cover of 9 Inch Nails' song, Hurt. When people heard it, they were stunned. It wasn't just a cover, it felt like a goodbye. The music video showed the frail, aging Cash looking back on his life. Scenes from his past were mixed with images of a man nearing the end. His voice trembled as he sang, "Everyone I know goes away in the end." Even the original songwriter, Trent Reznor, said it no longer felt like his own song. Cash's health was getting worse. In May 2003, his beloved wife June died. Her loss devastated him, but he kept working. He told Rubin, "Keep me busy, or I'll die." From his home in Virginia, now in a wheelchair, Cash recorded 60 songs in the final 4 months of his life. On August 21, 2003, he recorded what would be his last 2 songs, Like the 309 and Engine 143. Like the 309 was released after his death in 2006. It talked about death head-on, using train imagery he had loved his whole life. The lyrics were simple and powerful. It was his way of saying goodbye. Engine 143, recorded for a Carter family tribute, honored the musical roots he'd always carried with him. Through it all, Cash never stopped thinking about bigger things: life, death, legacy, and love. In his final public performance, just 2 months before his passing, he said he still felt June's presence. "We connect somewhere between here and heaven," he told the audience. Johnny Cash died on September 12, 2003, but his final songs stripped down and full of soul, told the last chapter of his life better than any tribute could. They showed the same man who sang about sorrow and sin in his youth, now looking death in the eye, with clarity, honesty, and grace. He came full circle, taking one last train ride home.